News First, Newsline.
Hello there, very good evening. Welcome to another edition of Newsline Live. It is because the people of Sri Lanka had the freedom of expression that they could have expressed their views, expressed their displeasure in how the government was functioning last year at the height of the economic crisis. It is because the people had the freedom of expression that they were able to bring about a change in the government that has resulted in whatever form of development that we have been able to achieve today from the height of the economic crisis last year. It is because the general public had the freedom of expression that they could have voiced out their opinions and come out and said enough is enough. But are we facing a risk of losing this fundamental right that has been guaranteed to us from the Constitution? To discuss these matters and much more, we've got with us here today Attorney at Law Swasthika Arulingam. Thank you very much, Swasthika, for joining us on our program.
Thank you.
Swasthika, now things are not as heated as it was last year, of course. That's for the betterment of the country, of course. People are not protesting on the street every day. We have fuel, we have gas, we have our basic necessities, albeit a lot more expensive than what it was. But do you think that there are efforts on the part of those in power to silently take steps to ensure that people will not be able to rise up in the future if a 2022 economic crisis repeats itself?
I have a slightly different position to yours in terms of the situation of the country. I think the upper middle classes and the middle classes are doing okay despite the rise in prices and so on. But there is a large class of people, I always say this, there's a large class of people who are not eating in this country. They are only eating one meal per day. So the situation has not normalized. This is also, we can also get into the politics of the Aragale when we speak about it, but the situation for a large group of people have not normalized, and that is also the reason why we have a mass exodus of people from all classes of society. But despite this happening, I do agree with you that people are not coming into the streets and protesting. And one of the reasons for that is that the government systematically, since the Aragale came to an end, the government systematically placed military, riot squads, police onto the street almost disproportionately, and gave a very clear message to people that if you do come and protest on the streets, we would crush the protest, we would prison you, we would harass you, we would file cases against you and so on.
Right.
So because of that, the protests have been silenced on the street.
Okay.
So while that is happening on one side, now we are also seeing that the government is creating this legal architecture through this online safety bill, through the anti-terror bill and so on and so forth, to create a legal structure whereby in the future, as you correctly said, people will be terrorized from even coming to the streets and exercising their freedom of association, freedom of assembly, as well as freedom of expression and so on.
So moving on, Swasthika, what are these steps at least that the government are taking to ensure that people will not be able to raise their voice in the future?
So right now, starting from this year, there has been a few bills which have come on. For instance, the Bureau of Rehabilitation Bill, which I would call a very similar bill to, or very similar act to, the creation of forced labor camps. If you look at the bill, there are provisions to create forced labor camps in that act. So that was passed, in fact. So similarly, now the government is coming up with the online safety bill.
That was passed with amendments, though.
Yes, but the provision on the labor camps are still intact in the bill. But of course, certain amendments were made as per the Supreme Court guidelines.
So, according to the Rehabilitation Bill or the Rehabilitation Act that is now in force, those who have been addicted to drugs or substance abuse can be sent to forced labor camps.
It's not termed as forced labor camps, but if you go through the act, it actually talks about placing people in these rehabilitation centers to productively use them for economic purposes and so on. So what does productively using them for economic purposes mean? So of course these are nice words which are being placed inside the Bureau of Rehabilitation Bill, but of course because of the Supreme Court's very strong intervention, the scope of the bill has been reduced. But after the bill has been passed, we are hearing of stories where people have been sent to drug rehabilitation and the families have been unable to trace them. They have to go through many administrative obstacles to in fact find where their family members have been placed. So we are already hearing stories of this nature coming out. But answering your question on what's happening now, there are two bills which are horrendous and which should not exist in a democracy to begin with. One is the online safety bill and the other is the anti-terror bill which is coming into place. The online safety bill is something very novel. It aims to create an online safety commission, which is in the future going to have lots of powers to determine what is truth and what is not in the future. The commission will have almost exclusive powers to decide what is truth and what is not. The Anti-Terror Act or the bill, of course, is the part 2 of 2.0, as some people had called it, of the PTA, whereby Terror Act is going to continue with a few amendments and changes. Some people have called the Anti-Terror Bill the next phase of the Prevention of Terrorism Act.
So, Swasthika, what exactly are the provisions in, at least, just like you said, the anti-terrorism bill has been placed on the order paper but not tabled in Parliament, the online safety bill. Now, when you at least read the short title of this bill, online safety, that's a good thing, right?
So the act itself, and that's the irony of it, right? The act itself calls itself the online safety bill, or the bill calls itself online safety. But if you look at the introduction, the preamble to the bill, it says to establish the Online Safety Commission to make provisions to prohibit online communication of certain statements of fact in Sri Lanka. It says to make provisions to prohibit online communication of certain statements of fact in Sri Lanka. So that itself, I think, summarizes the intention of this bill, that is to prohibit certain statements of facts in Sri Lanka. And when we go through this bill, it has several provisions. When you go through this bill, it becomes obvious that it is not about online safety of vulnerable groups of people. When we think of online safety, we think of, let's say, women and children who are subjected to harassment, who are subjected to abuse online, vulnerable groups of people, the LGBTQI community who are subjected to harassment. But this bill, even though there are certain tokenistic provisions to protect these groups of people, by and large, this is about the state taking control over narratives which go online in terms of critiquing the state, in terms of dissenting to what the state is doing, and in terms of, if you look at the structure of this bill, it is also about harassing people through summoning them to the Online Safety Commission, summoning them to courts, filing charges against them in courts, sending directives by the commission, and if you don't comply by that, then it becomes a crime. So it's about harassing online activists, online journalists, people who express their opinions online, simply about harassing them, if you look at the structure of this act.
But if I remember correctly, recently Minister Manushana Naikara was speaking about the online safety bill, and what he said was, we are not trying to suppress netizens, we're not trying to suppress online activists. What we're simply saying is that for whatever people say, just like what people do, if a person does something, there is a certain consequence that is attached to it. Similarly, we need a consequence for things that people say. In this case, things that people say online. People must be responsible for the things that they say online, and that is the only intention of this act. That's what they say.
Since you mentioned Mr. Manush Naikara, he is also recently mooting a labour law reform, which many labour activists, trade unions, as well as human rights activists have called it the end to freedom of association through by ending the right to unionize, and that is the kind of the laws Mr. Manush Naikara is mooting or thinking of bringing about. So I would not take his opinion very seriously. But since you mentioned this particular question of people should have consequence to what they say, yes, they should have consequences. If it impacts children, if it impacts women, if it threatens the safety of certain groups of vulnerable people, then of course there has to be penal sanctions. But if it's a civil offence, let's say I make a statement and it defames someone. For a long time we had criminal defamation in Sri Lanka, but for whatever reason people debated over it, people rationalized it and decided that defamation should be a civil offence, it should not be a criminal offence, and it was removed off the penal code. And through this bill, you once again try to introduce the criminal factor to freedom of expression opinion. And what is most interesting is that the decision to decide what is a false statement, what is a prohibited statement, what is a false statement, lies with a group of 5 people who are appointed by the president. The president has the full authority to appoint them. He has the authority to even remove them if he pleases. So president appoints a commission, and this commission sits like God and decides whether my opinion is false or not. Just to give a very specific example, recently you would have heard about the Kurundur Malay incident in Mullaitivu. So there are 2 factions. One argue that this is historically a Buddhist site, and another argue no, this is a Hindu site, and therefore there should not be interventions in, or there should be freedom for Hindus to go and worship there. Now these are 2 competing factions. The state, the archaeological department, the many state institutions including the military have taken the position, no, this is a Buddhist site, so therefore we are going to protect anyone who is trying to make this into a Buddhist institution. Then we have the courts on the other side, which wants to protect or which has given orders to protect certain worshipping rights of Hindus. Now the commission is going to sit in the middle and decide which is false and which is true. How do you decide which of this narrative is true and which of the narrative is false? And that is exactly why in a democracy you have certain leeway, I would say, to debate and discuss and have different points of view without having this authority determining what truth is, because what is truth to me could be false to you. So there should be space to dissent and debate and create ideas, and that is exactly what this bill is preventing from by introducing this authority.
So Swasthika, now like you said, the Supreme Court has always ensured that the fundamental rights of the citizens of Sri Lanka are protected, be it from external factors or internal factors. And we've seen multiple bills being taken to the Supreme Court, challenged in its bill stage, and several provisions, like you said, in the rehabilitation bill being struck down by the Supreme Court on the grounds that it is unconstitutional. So a bare reading of this online safety bill, what's your take on this?
The government, for whatever reason, has been drafting bill after bill where you can't pick a provision and say if this bill with a few amendments is a good bill. This bill as a whole, leave out the provisions on certain provisions which protects children from abuse and so on.
So there are a few like that.
There are a few like that. Protecting children from abuse. There are provisions which, for instance, if I have a personal relationship with another person, then if my pictures are shared without my consent, then there are provisions to protect me from, in a certain sense, my privacy. So there are few provisions like that. But if you take the bill as a whole, starting from the point of establishing a commission, a 5-member commission, which is going to sit in a round table and decide over a meeting whether an issue, a fact is true or not. Starting from that, the legal structure of this bill itself is problematic. So even if you have certain good provisions like that, this bill is there to abuse freedom of expression of people who are going to be commenting, who are going to be, as you very correctly said in the start, who are going to be speaking against the government, against policies of the government which are going to be unpopular on the ground. So that is what this bill is targeting. Now if the government is actually concerned about, let's say, vulnerable groups of people, as I mentioned before, then focus on those provisions and bring structures which already exist. We have structures, for instance, if I am abused online, I am able to go to the CID and obtain some kind of assistance. Now that structure is not working properly for me. If I am sexually harassed online and I go to the CID today, for most cases the CID does not act effectively and promptly. So the issue is not that we don't have structures. The issue is that the structures which exist do not work to protect the vulnerable. So why are you giving these structures more powers to in fact crush or curtail this space for free expression under the guise of protecting vulnerable groups of people, when you already have laws? For instance, you have laws against child abuse, you have laws against sexual harassment, but those are not implemented. That is the issue. So this is not about protecting vulnerable people. Of course, you can take a few sections out of this and make a bill of its own. The bill would have 3-4 sections. But this whole idea of creating a commission which is going to decide over a meeting what is true and what is not, and on that decision, on that coffee table decision, they are going to issue directives, and if I don't listen to the directives, I am liable to a 5-year sentence and a fine, 1 million fine, and then if I commit the offence again, then the sentence can be doubled. I mean, when is the last time you have heard of an offence in Sri Lanka where if you're convicted once, you're given one sentence, if you're convicted twice, then you're giving double the sentence. I mean, these laws should not exist in a democratic institution. So we are moving away from principles of democracy, from criminal liability. What is criminal liability? We are moving away from principles of protecting someone's right. Someone has to be punished if they commit an offence. If they commit an offence again, they should be punished again for the same offence and the same punishment. But what is this notion of you being punished for the second time and then your sentence also doubles? It does not make any sense to me.
But Swasthika, now when we speak about taking responsibility for the statements that we make, I believe the online safety bill, not only statements that are made, not only written statements made online, even if you give a speech and it's published online, even those statements are also liable to fine or a sentence, a prison sentence. Now let's speak a bit about Sri Lanka's political structure and statements made by our politicians. For the longest time we were told that nothing's wrong in Sri Lanka, we have enough and more money, we're not going to face an economic crisis, but then we did last year. So if the provisions of this act are passed, do you think that it will apply equally to Sri Lanka's political elite? Because there might be a few people who really needs to be held accountable under this act.
So the only answer I can give to that is our own experience. If you take the ICCPR Act, for instance, there is a section 3 where it says if a person makes a statement to create religious hostilities or tensions, then you can technically punish that, arrest that person, punish him and so on. So that specific act is there to maintain peace within races, within religious communities and so on. But to date, that particular provision has only been used to target journalists, to target the stand-up comedian, to target people who have spoken against the status quo for whatever reason, against the status, the Sinhala Buddhism, for instance. That is what that particular section has been used for. But there have been political leaders who have made statements completely placing minority communities under threat. There has been Buddhist monks on their statement, riots have happened in this country, but they were never arrested under this section. So when you look, and then of course the recent MP Sarath Weerasekara making that comment about the Mullaithiva judge in parliament, abusing his parliamentary privilege. Not a single action has been taken against him by his own members of his own party or his party. But the judge has resigned, saying that he has threat to his life. So when people of political power make statements, certain inflammatory statements in this country, the history of the country is that the law is never applied to them. The law is always applied to intimidate weak groups of people, to intimidate people who have been standing up to the government against policies which has been against large groups of against the interests of the Sri Lankan population. So the government has used these laws to crush dissent. And that is what this act as well as the ATA is going to do in the future.
Swasthika, do you think that the government has been successful in crushing dissent with whatever actions that you say they've taken?
There has been several instances where, for instance, when people go on the streets to protest, they would come and ask me, do we need to get permission from the police? If we don't get permission from the police, can we be arrested and so on. There has been instances where people would want to make a political statement on dissenting on a government policy, and they would say, can I be arrested under the PTA for this? Can I be arrested under the ICCPR for this? So the government has done enough to threaten people to an extent where people are now practicing self-censorship. So this is without the online safety bill. This is without it. This is on their own. After the Aragal years, CID has been summoning people and so on. So people are now afraid even without a law. Imagine if this law comes, you put a statement, someone makes a complaint against you, the commission sends you a directive, and within 24 hours you have to remove the directive, otherwise you can be punished for it. Imagine the self-censorship which is going to come about even if this act is there in the statute book and not implemented. So these bills, let's say they are not even implemented, they are just lying, they are just sleeping, no one is implementing them. The simple fact that this online safety bill is going to become an act itself would would terrorize people, in fact, from speaking, and self-censorship, so to speak.
So, Swasthika, what do you think now? The government has expressed their clear intention of passing this act. Of course, they've drafted it, they've tabled it in Parliament, and now it's on the order paper. It's, I believe, I don't think anyone has challenged it. Court as yet.
They have filed petitions, but we have that 2-week period before the court takes it up.
So besides the petitions that have been filed and the determination of the Supreme Court, if there is anyone who objects to these bills and are of the opinion that these shouldn't be a part of the law in Sri Lanka, what are the options really that are available to them?
So the court has, despite, for instance, in the Bureau of Rehabilitation Act, the court gave a very strong position on that bill, on that act. But despite that, the court's jurisdiction in terms of bills is very limited. The court has to look at whether certain provisions of the bill are inconsistent with certain provisions of the constitution, and the court can give an opinion on whether it can pass with a simple majority or whether you need a 2/3 as well as a referendum, and so on. And that 2/3 and referendum has always been a high threshold, and it doesn't come easily. So the court's jurisdiction on bills is very, I would say, very narrow, and the court acts on that narrow jurisdiction and does its function. So if we look at this bill, not strictly in terms of a legalistic term, but in terms of the social and political implication this act is going to have on our society as a whole, we need to challenge this bill. Not only, we should not just leave it to the courts, I would say. We have to challenge this bill on the ground. We should protest against this, write about it, speak about it, and make sure that every member of parliament knows that this is not going to be a popular bill amongst the people if this is passed in parliament. Now that's not going to be easy, because in the past also we have protested, we have spoken about it, we have campaigned against bill, but for instance, like the Bureau of Rehabilitation Act, it has passed in parliament. But that is the only option we have. We can't simply rely on a state institution like the court. The court is also part of the state structure, right? So we can't only rely on the court to challenge this. We are a democratic country. We have the right, up until now at least, we have the right of freedom of expression, the freedom of association and assembly, and despite, even if this bill comes into being, those rights are guaranteed and protected in the constitution, at least on namesake, at least on paper. So we have to, in order to gain back what we have lost so far through the PTA, we need to continue to expand that space, of democracy. And that is what we did through the Aragalia. So simply because the government comes and puts 100 military officers on the streets, another 100 riot squad on the street, we have taken a step back and we have gone into our own houses and we are like, we are not going to do politics anymore. But if we would have said that last year, we would still be having a president whom none of us wanted in power. So the summary of what I am trying to say is, these bills, this government is always going to be introducing bills like this. So we can of course say, okay, we have challenged it, and wait, too bad, we have challenged it, the Supreme Court has decided, the bill has passed. But if we are going to stop at that, we are allowing democracy and spaces of free expression to close. And that is what is happening through these bills. So whether this bill is passed or not is secondary. I would say keep the dissent, speak about it, write about it, protest against it, protest in front of parliament about it, protest, and document what we are doing now, so that in another 3-4 years time, when a new government comes or when a new institution comes, then we can say, no, we want this bill reversed. This has been the position, this has been our position from day one of this bill. So we want this reversed, we want this gone from our statute books.
Swasthika, we're in the final few minutes of the show. There are quite a lot of people who are tired of fighting, especially given the economic crisis and the toll that it has had on the lives of the people. There are those who are of the opinion that there's nothing that can really be done. The political elite are the ones who pull the strings, and one way or another they will find a way to somehow end up on top. People are, in short, tired of fighting for their rights. What do you have to say to these people?
There are people who can't afford to be tired. As I said at the start, there are people who are not eating in this country and they are still on the streets fighting. Farmers are still fighting. Government officers are fighting against corrupt privatization deals, because it's not an option for them to be tired and for them to not fight. So last year the Aragalaya was a success because everyone came together. But after the Aragalaya came to an end, many people, as you said, have gone back into their spaces, and they are saying that they are tired. And of course I understand. I understand fatigue, because we are, both of us are in political spaces and so on. But being tired, our country is in one of the worst economic crises since 1930s. Being tired is not an option. If we get tired and if we pull out, then we are leaving this country to a political and business elite, who are the reason why we have come into this crisis. So I would say, yes, we fought in Aragalaya. We got what we wanted. We got what we demanded. It was brought to an end through the military, through a military intervention. But take a break. If you're tired, take a break. Come back to the streets. Take 2 months, 3 months. Go abroad. If you have to earn for your family, go abroad. But come back for another day to fight. Because when people get tired, that is when we lose democracy. That is when we lose our spaces, our democratic spaces, because people have pulled out of the fight. So people will continue to fight. People, for issues which matter to them, free education, free health, food, people will continue to fight. What we have to do, what people of more privileged classes have to do, is if they feel tired, take a break and come back to fight on another day. Because if you stop fighting, then that is when democracy ends in this country.
Thank you very much, Swasthika Arulingam. And that's how it was on Newsline today. Of course, we will join you again, same time, same place, tomorrow. Until we meet again, take care and God bless.